Hello, we are in Loomus Academy, and today I'm talking with Nick, and our topic is alternatives for veterinarians. Yes, and he will explain us more about it. In Estonia, we don't have it too much, this information. Hopefully, this will help to spread this knowledge. Hello, Nick.
Hello, and thank you for the invitation to speak on your podcast.
Sure. Um, First of all, tell us a little bit about yourself. How did you end up there?
So, yes, I've been involved in campaigning for most of my adult life, or all of my adult life, really, after going to university doing a science degree. But I started off very suddenly, actually, becoming involved in campaigning in the last year of my degree, and my focus was very wide, really. We covered a lot of human rights, animal protection work, environmental campaigning, and also sort of health and economic justice and so on. So really, for a lot of that time, and for many years afterwards, I was involved in campaigning on multiple fronts, multiple grounds. I began to see the connections between many of the problems in the world, some of the common dynamics and justifications across these many different forms of discrimination and exploitation, and areas of suffering. And at the same time, I was also loosely involved in some of the areas of animal experimentation and the alternatives. That was one area within that broad range of topics I had an interest in. And I went to the first public conference of what was called EuroNICHE, which was the predecessor of InterNICHE, my organization. And that conference was actually in the UK, and it was the first public conference, which was the second event following the initial meeting of campaigners who were getting together to focus on this field. And that was back in 1988. And 89 was this first conference in the UK, the public one. So I went to that as a sort of young campaigner. And it was an interesting field. I could see that animal use in education was a topic worth focusing on and that was of interest. But the event itself covered lots and lots of different fields, some of which was really not so connected with education. And I was invited to become part of the British group, which I then went to a few meetings of. And then I think there was a few shaky times where the organization might not have continued. But I was then invited to become the European representative in the British group and went to my first meeting in Scandinavia. And that was a chance really to meet people who are campaigning on this field all across Europe. And it's very interesting to meet people from so many different cultures. And this was 1992, I believe. So not only the signing of the Maastricht Treaty for the EU, but also a gathering of these campaigners who are interested in campaigning at a European level as well as nationally and getting together internationally in the field. So that was really the very beginning of my involvement in it, I think, so from 89, 92. And from then onwards, I got more involved in the organization.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, I was doing lots of direct action for human rights and environmental campaigning, more radical action. And the EuroNICHE work seemed like something that was important, but maybe not as important as the direct action, which I felt was a very valuable and effective way of trying to create change. But over time, I began to see, I think, the value and the importance of education, just how important it was to support, in this case, students who were conscientiously objecting to harmful animal use in their university degrees of medicine, veterinary medicine, and biology, and who were demanding ethical approaches for their education. And I began to see the importance not only of their conscientious objection, but the value of defending people's ethical positions and how that continues onwards into the professions and society. So I think seeing the value of education in terms of creating change in the here and now, and the impact of that as people graduate, as people join society and contributing to society. So over time, I realized the value of this field. And I started to take on responsibility in the organization and in this area of campaigning to a much larger degree, so that now there's nothing really else that I do other than campaigning in this field. But even though it looks like a very specific focus, the use of animals or humane alternatives within higher education, the impact of any change that can be achieved within that area is very great, and it has there's an impact in multiple different fields, not just for the animals that are can be replaced with humane innovations, but also how well students can learn in the field, how effectively teachers can pass on their knowledge and skills to students by using the right tools and the humane tools, but also how well equipped the graduates are for when they enter the professions and enter into society to do a better job. So the impact is very broad, even though it looks like a narrow focus. And I think the importance is recognizing that many of these things are interconnected.
Just for those people who maybe don't really know, how are animals used in education? Probably we know in a biology you take a frog, but it's a story from the books. But what is the real use?
So animals can be used in education in different areas. Firstly, we have secondary education, and sometimes across the world there is still dissections for learning anatomy, part of biology, in high school at the secondary level. In other countries, it might be illegal or just not practiced. Then there's higher education, which is our main focus. And then we're dealing with three different faculties, really: medicine, veterinary medicine, and biology. Within each of those faculties, you have different disciplines. So, for example, anatomy, the learning about the body and its structures; physiology, different organ systems and how they work; nerve physiology, for example, or exercise physiology. There's also other areas, but when it comes to medicine and veterinary medicine, then you also have clinical skills and surgery. So those are the different disciplines. And within those disciplines, you have practical classes as well as lectures and so on. And within those practical classes, animals are sometimes used in ways that are harmful. So there are many different practical classes and many different tools and approaches you can use within those practical classes to gain knowledge and to gain skills. Okay, and some of those practical classes might involve dissection of purpose-killed animals, such as killing of frogs in order to learn anatomy, as is the case sometimes in secondary level, but also at university level with a bit more advanced knowledge issues. Or you might have animal experimentation, so animals being used while they're alive. And this is also called vivisection, but animal experimentation covers the area more effectively, I think, as a term. And then you might have, within the animal experimentation, you might also have animals killed freshly so that you can take a specific tissue so that while it's more or less still alive, you can do an experiment as well. That's called a preparation. And finally, you have other instrumental animal use. So it might be practicing giving an injection to a horse or a dog. It's not a dissection, it's not an animal experiment, but it's still using an animal harmfully, still using an animal as an object, as a tool in order to meet a specific teaching objective. So those different areas are where animals might be used harmfully. And within all those areas, all those practical classes, you can also use humane, innovative tools, humane alternatives. And these alternatives are often already in use in many different universities around the world, but things vary a lot by country, by culture, by individual university, by individual department. And often it's the head of the department or the head of a course who make the decisions about which tool is used within their practical class.
Mm-hmm. Is there also money involved so that using animals is kind of cheaper, or people think that it's cheaper to take other alternatives?
I think one of the main reasons for animal use, which in general is harmful animal use, there are some ways of working with animals that are not harmful and that give benefit to the individual animals. And we'll talk about those when we explore the different types of alternative. But generally, animal use is harmful animal use. And I think one of the main reasons it has continued in some areas, and there's been a lot of change recently, which is very positive, but where it still continues is primarily out of habit. People for decades, and in some cases hundreds of years, have used animals as tools, as objects, in order to contribute to education. That's the perception. There are better ways of contributing to education, and there are also negative lessons from using animals harmfully. So there are certainly there's a lot of opportunity for change. But I think habit is one of the main issues here. Of course, if animals are cheap to buy, then that makes it easy to use animals harmfully. But there are also very cheap alternatives and free alternatives too. So it's not the only reason. Another reason is, I think, awareness of the different types of alternatives, awareness of where these are already implemented to the benefit of everyone at universities, many departments across the world. So it's a question of awareness. And I think we also have to bear in mind that many teachers are very busy, very stressed. They've got a lot on their plate, and thinking about redesigning a course or redesigning a curriculum might feel like too much. I think it's important to remember that many of the alternatives that have been developed by the teachers themselves, primarily to enhance the quality of teaching. A well-designed learning tool developed by the teachers themselves can often meet teaching objectives more effectively. And teachers are thinking about teaching objectives all the time and how best to meet them. Another reason for them developing it is to save money, because they can develop a good tool that is cheaper. And also growing class sizes often mean that having for example, a well-distributed software that everyone can use through the university intranet is much more effective for growing class sizes. So that can be another reason. And I think a final but very important reason is the pressure from students, from campaigners, from society in general, to improve the quality of education and to make it more ethical at the same time. So the pressure from campaigners is very important because it helps expose everyone to the information that there are good tools out there, that many teachers have already developed and implemented them. And of course, if you can make education more ethical, then why not do that? So it's really many different reasons why these tools are being developed, why they're being implemented, but often it's teachers behind the process of development and implementation. And I think when teachers are aware of the multiple positive benefits of these tools, then there are very few arguments against their implementation.
Yeah, it's like I have thought that, for example, nobody uses person to learn what is inside the person, and it is possible to make very difficult kind of treatments in hospitals without anybody being used in a way animals have been used, right? So I guess it should be possible. But my question is about the time. You said you have been in that area quite some time. How would you describe the change during that time? Do you think the change is happening in a okay tempo, or should it be quicker? Or
it's always good, I think, when change to eliminate suffering and to improve education can happen as fast as possible. And I think there's been a number of different sort of stages from the very late 80s. I think there was a growing environmental and animal protection awareness across the world, especially in Europe. And that led to a lot of conscientious objection, a lot of awareness of the need to challenge the situation where there was unnecessary harm to animals. And really from the early 90s, as the beginning of computer software and hardware became much more widespread, and people could realize there was a lot of potential in information technology, then teachers started to develop tools that could actually provide the same or better ways of learning within fields like anatomy, physiology, pharmacology, for example. So you had the beginnings of computer software and simulations of animal experiments and preparations happening from the early 90s. One very good example perhaps is of Germany, where there was a lot of student conscientious objection to harmful animal use in education. And an interesting response from some teachers in terms of developing different tools for the purpose of education. So at the University of Marburg in Germany, there was a physiology practical class, or a series of practical classes, nerve physiology, muscle physiology, and so on, where animal experiments had been done for many, many decades, if not hundreds of years. But all the students refused to do the animal experiments. They considered that these experiments were unnecessary, were cruel, and that there should be alternatives, especially as people became aware of the potential of computer technology to be able to simulate such experiments. Now, the teacher, Professor Hans Braun, was at first very unhappy with this because he thought that the animal experiments, the preparations, were the best way of gaining knowledge within physiology. But all the students were on strike, so he responded in a very good way by developing, along with his colleagues, a number of simulations that would provide the same knowledge, he hoped, as the animal experiments, but still for as the students participated in the development and the creation of new iterations of this software, he still felt that the animal experiment was the best way and was not really happy with the students refusing to do what he wanted. However, after a year of this software being used by the students, he realized that students were learning better using the software, using the virtual laboratories. Okay, they had video demonstrations of the preparation of a nerve within the software. Then they had the experiment itself, where they could set the different parameters across a number of different apparatus in the virtual laboratory that you could see on the screen. And then you could do the experiment, analyze the data, and so on. He realized that the students were more self-directed using the software, were relying less on the teachers and teaching assistants or the older students in order to understand the concepts, or maybe even to get some of the results, and were better at working in small teams as a collective in order to understand the principles of different areas of physiology. So initially, he thought this was not a good idea. He responded very well, and then he accepted that actually students were learning better using the software. And in fact, following that, he also started to apply simulations into his research as well. And that replaced virtually all the experiments in his research work in neurophysiology. So it was a very interesting situation where it became apparent the power of technology to support the learning process. And now those softwares, SimNerve, SimMuscle, SimHeart, SimPatch, SimVessel, which sort of work in the area of physiology and the pharmacological aspects of physiology, are used in medical and veterinary medical institutes and universities all across Germany and in many other countries as well. So that's an example of how change happened in one area, students objecting, the potential of technology, and then the realization by everyone that actually this was a better way of learning, which then really firmly established software education and virtual laboratories as a standard way of learning. So he and many other people don't really think about these tools anymore as alternatives. They think about them as good learning tools that are better than what happened before. So technology is a very, very important area. And of course, technology itself has gone through many, many different stages of growth. Throughout the rest of the 1990s, the quality of software and the power of hardware was increasing rapidly. And now we have a stage where there's some really amazing augmented reality and virtual reality, AR and VR, which can also really help with a wide range of different teaching areas, from anatomy, where you can go through different layers of a body and move it around. Either you're wearing a mask for VR or you're in an immersive room. And this very sort of immersive and sensory environment is also an extra way, an extra addition to the quality of learning, with potential to enhance it. But also you have the potential, of course, to be able to practice clinical skills and surgery as well within software too, especially medicine, where there's more money available than veterinary medicine. But there is the beginning of AR and VR within veterinary medicine too. So I think some of the latest technology is really, really helping to both replace any residual animal experimentation, but also further enhance the quality of education and training. And then in very recent years, we have newer technology again, like 3D printing. So universities that might have a very good 3D printer can, of course, print their own teaching tools, whether it's synthetic bones or suture pads, or more complex models. And these are also opportunities, I think, to be able to produce tools and to produce them locally. So you don't need to be buying things internationally or having to deal with customs and import and so on. So you can have local production of alternatives too. Software has often been produced locally and then by a teacher or university and then marketed internationally by companies, by collaborating between academia and the corporate world. So there's opportunities, I think, there for anyone to be able to sell tools they've developed and bring in some income, but also you can produce things locally just for your own purposes too. And I think that's another sort of area. So I'd say at the moment there's been some really good developments within education training. A lot of replacements started to happen, replacement of harmful animal use from really the late 80s, but especially the early 90s onwards. And there's been further sort of stages of that process of replacement as people think, okay, what are we really trying to teach here? So the auditing of courses, identification of teaching objectives, seeing whether you can enhance the quality of education by adding new objectives or meeting existing ones better, and an awareness, I think, of what we call the hidden curriculum. And these are the implicit and usually negative messages that a certain teaching tool or approach might be given to the students. So the message that it's fine to abandon your ethical principles because of the supposed greater good, or that becoming desensitized to animal harm, animal suffering, is actually a necessary process for you to become a surgeon, which is not true, or that you always follow your teacher and you never question things. In other words, you suspend your critical thinking skills, which is not a good way of really training yourself as a future scientist or professional or member of society. Or that compassion and empathy, or understanding ethical issues and thinking of solutions to them, this sort of emotional and ethical literacy, seeing those as unimportant or even negative issues, and teaching conformity and desensitization as part of the hidden curriculum. And sometimes those might be choices that teachers choose deliberately. For example, they might want to encourage students to go into animal research, which might be what the teachers are doing when they're not teaching. And so there might be a reason for students to become familiar with animal experiments rather than familiar with humane innovations. But mostly the hidden curriculum is something less conscious. So when you consider how best to meet standard objectives, how you can meet additional objectives like practicing in advance a specific surgical procedure that only a high quality mannequin can actually give you the opportunity to practice, and how you can obviate or remove the lessons of the hidden curriculum and its many problems, I think it's very clear that a combination of alternatives, of humane innovations, can do a better job.
But can you describe these alternatives now? One was technology, you talked, but which are other alternatives, if there are some?
So there's a wide range of different types of alternatives. There's video, such as a recording of an animal experiment or a related procedure, which can be digitized and is very flexible to use. There are, again, recordings of dissections that can be used. And of course, you could use an animal that died naturally in order for that dissection to be performed and recorded. So film and video is one important type of alternative. Then there's the more computer-based simulation, the virtual dissection, which might be, as I said, with film, a recording of a dissection, or it might be an animation as well, where you can actually do a dissection based on animated material. And within this, you might be able to dissolve away different layers of the body instead of actually simulated dissection as well. But it's still learning anatomy, which is the purpose. You can also have images of dissection, where you've got sort of hundreds of labels that you can use to identify structures. And again, there you can often dissolve away layers to the next level and have a sort of software where you can have so much information and so many images and labels that it far exceeds what you could have achieved with a real dissection. So in terms of learning anatomy, you can do often a lot better by using the digital resources. Then you have the virtual laboratory, which is more interactive, as I mentioned before with the virtual physiology series, where you're actually doing an experiment on the screen, simulating an animal experiment. And then the more advanced technology like augmented reality and virtual reality. And the latter, of course, you might even have the sense of touch simulated too. So haptic technology. It's not always needed. It's not always a functionality that you have to have, but it can be very useful for certain practical classes, certain procedures where the sense of touch is important. So that's the sort of range of technology-based alternatives. But of course, technology is part of many types of alternatives. And one other area that's very important is the use of models and mannequins and material simulators. So these could be everything from a very basic silicone pad for students to be able to practice the very basics of surgery, like eye-hand coordination psychomotor skills, building up your muscle memory, learning how to suture, how to hold a scalpel, and so on. And those are of sufficient fidelity or sufficient level of realism at the level of a very basic pad to perfectly fit into those early surgical training classes. You don't have to have the highest level of simulator for basic surgery. So a simple suture pad made of silicone or rubber is sufficient for that level. Then you can move on to a more advanced suture pad with 3, 5, 7 layers and practice suturing and work with the scalpel, even sort of dealing with bleeding, because you can have vessels built into those suture pads. And that's sort of the next level of your clinical skills and surgical training. And then you can move on to more complex models, such as a multi-layered bowel for you to practice doing surgery on that simulated bowel material, right up to models and mannequins of individual organs or limbs or whole bodies of different animals. And there's a wide range of different tools, cat, dog, cow, horse, where you can practice this sort of range of clinical skills and surgical procedures on. Many of these models are, of course, for individual procedures, such as how to take blood from the neck of a horse, how to put in a nasogastric tube, how to do intubation in a cat, and so on. Other models have got multiple functionalities. And our film series has a new episode looking specifically at canine clinical skills and surgery. And we'll talk about this in a minute, but it's basically a very advanced model from the company Sindava, who have developed a tool for training in a wide range of different clinical skills and surgical procedures. The more advanced models like this, although they're more expensive, they're often a very, very good investment for a university, because they help the student to practice and practice and practice again and really develop the mastery, the confidence and the competence in order to go on to the next stage, which might be working with animal patients, for example, before you graduate. So developments in materials science has allowed for some really, really high fidelity, high quality tools that can be used for very, very effective training in surgery, for example. So models like this, I think, really give an opportunity for students to keep on practicing and also to do it in a good environment. You know, animal experiments are not a really good way of learning. Often you don't get a chance to really participate because you're watching half the time or switching between students. You've got all the stress of knowing that the animal is alive and you don't want to harm the animal, but what can you do? This is what's been presented. And it might be very complex with all this sort of machinery and equipment apparatus that you don't really need to know about. So the alternatives often simplify the context of the lab, so that you can focus on the teaching objectives and meet them better. So I think the models and mannequins are a very good example of that, as well as the software. Then there's also other types of alternative, as we would see them, that are not non-animal tools like software or models and mannequins, but actually do involve real animals. For example, if you're a veterinary student or a zoology student, you need to know what animals are like and feel like. You need to be able to touch real animals, to know what an organ feels like, and to work with real living tissue. It's the same to some degree with physiology, but I'll come back to that in a minute. So the question is, well, how can you then meet the teaching objectives associated with some aspects of anatomy and with surgery in a fully ethical way? And we promote 3 different areas for that. In the physiology angle, software is excellent. You can learn all the sort of knowledge, the physiological principles using software, but then you can apply it on living body by doing student self-experimentation. So this is where you might have a very minor electric shock on your wrist, your arm, and then look at the nerve response in order to understand nerve physiology. Okay. That's fun. It's going to be more memorable. It's a good learning environment. If you're a medical student, it's perfect. You've got the appropriate reference object, the human body. But also if you're a veterinary student, it's good because we're all mammals and it's important to be able to understand that. Same with biology students. So self-experimentation, drinking coffee, doing urine analysis, doing some exercise to look at exercise physiology, nerve and muscle physiology too. These are areas where you can do experiments on yourself. And in combination with software, you can very clearly meet and exceed the standard teaching objectives and do a better job. So self-experimentation is another type of alternative where you still have the living whole body. But when it comes to clinical skills and surgery, what we can do, we can, and also some degree anatomy, we can think about using what we call ethically sourced animal cadavers. So this is free living animals that died naturally or in an accident or had to be euthanized, put down for medical reasons, in other words, for their own benefit. And there are body donation programs for animals, just like there are for humans. And of course, these are structures and systems that can be established, can be set up by faculties in order to provide bodies that can be used, one, for dissection, because dissection, when it's relevant, which is not medical students, dissection of animals is not relevant for medical students, but it is relevant for veterinary students and some zoologists. Those bodies can be used for dissection along with models, along with software. They're one specific tool, but also they can be preserved through plastination or through other cheaper methods of preserving bodies. So either used fresh or preserved. They can even be perfused with colored water to simulate blood. So you end up with a live, with circulation and pulsation. So you can actually practice surgery on a preserved specimen too. And I think those methods are very, very valuable as replacements and opportunities to enhance the training for, especially for medical and veterinary students, or veterinary students. In the case of animals, the medical students would have human bodies for to some degree for dissection, and also could be used with perfusion and pulsation for surgery too. So this is one area, the use of ethically sourced cadavers, that also provides an alternative, but which is not non-animal, but is still ethically sourced, is still ethical and humane. But when, of course, you need the living, breathing animal, then the question is, what opportunities do veterinary students, for example, have to be in that area and gain meet some of the teaching objectives specific to working with patients or to working with living animals, and working with animal patients in a teaching hospital, or having outreach, working in the community, or working and contributing to private clinics, veterinary clinics. Those opportunities, those learning opportunities associated with animal patients who need intervention, can provide another alternative to animal experimentation in surgery classes. So many veterinary universities have teaching hospitals, and students are able on a rotation to observe, assist, and then perform minor procedures under supervision once they've gained sufficient skills working with the non-animal models, working next with animal patients and helping them. So it's a healing environment, not one that involves harm. So that connects you more with the roots of medicine and veterinary medicine as a healing modality, and as a healing, providing a healing context. But also you get the chance to gain more in your training, because you get to work with animal patients, working with the client, understanding what the issue is, developing your awareness of animal behavior to be able to identify where there might be a problem with the animal and understand what the condition is. So the diagnosis aspect, and then the actual performance of a procedure, and the chance to practice that whilst also helping the animal at the same time. And also you just get exposed to the opportunity to help with all the recovery and post-operative care, again, which you don't have with the animal experiment. So you get to see the whole situation, which is a much more realistic reflection of what that student will have upon graduation in a clinic as a practitioner. And that's very, very important, I think, that they get a more realistic education. So clinical learning opportunities with animal patients is also an alternative to harmful animal use, to animal experimentation within practical classes, and gives you a lot more. Finally, we have, for biology students, but also some more biology focused veterinary students, the chance to work out in the field. So getting out of the lab, working in the field, helping in being part of field studies where you don't, again, harm animals in the field studies, but you can observe animals. You might have temporary capture in order to help that individual animal or the species in general, by understanding populations, pollution, and so on and so on. But you're working out in the field, helping animals that are free living. And those ethical field studies are also an alternative to harmful animal use in the lab, in practical classes. So this is the wide range of tools, non-animal and working with the real animals, but in a way that actually is either ethically neutral or helps individual animals at the same time. And of course, typically combinations of these tools, just like any education, you always use a combination of books and lectures and software. A good combination using well-designed learning tools, which they often are because they're often developed by teachers themselves, is a better way of learning and can make education fully ethical.
Maybe kind of the last question about InterNICHE. How maybe a little description of your work in the organization.
So I'm a coordinator of InterNICHE, which is the International Network for Humane Education. So I help coordinate projects internationally in terms of involving our mostly voluntary collection of network of national contacts and partner individuals and partner organizations, and helping the development of new resources in order to provide tools for teachers, students, and campaigners to participate in the process of change, of curricular transformation, from one that might involve harmful animal use to one that is fully humane, and that uses many of the humane innovations that have been developed over time.
Is there something you want to add, what I didn't ask, maybe?
I'll tell you about what we got on our website and our film. So those are quite big things. So so we have our website at interniche.org, and within this website there's a couple of databases, an alternatives database and a studies database. The former is a collection of over 1,500 tools that have been developed by teachers and companies that you can search for or filter for. And these are models and software and other tools that are available for sale that teachers can search and order directly from the companies or the universities. So that's an opportunity for you to see what range of alternatives exist, and to actually purchase them and implement them locally. You could also use the existence of many of these alternatives as support for developing your own tools too, or to liaise with some of the producers to understand what they've done, how they've developed these tools, how they've implemented them. And that brings me to the studies database, which is a collection of over 1,000 academic studies relating to this topic. So especially the development and implementation of non-animal tools and clinical learning opportunities, ethically sourced cadavers and preservation methods, but also the use of technology within education as well. So these are references and abstracts, and you can also contact me to get the full PDFs of academic studies published in journals about topics that relate to this focus of ours, and the broader sort of picture of using humane innovations and technology. We're also developing a video and image database, which will be providing video clips and images from our new film series. And this, again, will be a tool for anyone to be able to both watch film material and excerpts from that film material, as well as find very short clips or images to support your work, their work. So, for example, if you're making a PowerPoint to talk about alternatives, you can search that. You will be able to search that database in order to find a clip or a quote that will support what you're trying to say. So those 2 or soon 3 databases are free access resources that anyone can use, and there's a lot of other information on the website too. So that's one good source of information. We also produced our book From Guinea Pig to Computer Mouse many years ago. The second edition you can download from the website, and that has a number of case studies written by teachers who have developed these tools themselves and implemented them, and approaches like working with animal patients. So you can read teachers' own experiences of curricular transformation in that book. Much of the book is the first draft of the database, which is now online. So that part is now searchable and virtual. But the book with its case studies, and before that, the broader exploration of the topic and issues of teaching objectives, is something that you can download from the website. And we're working on a new book that'll be just case studies, which will be more up to date and with a wider range of content from across the world. So that's something to be written and produced over 2024 and immediately afterwards. Our new film series is called DVM, Training the Animal Doctor. DVM is the qualification for veterinarians in many countries. And this is a film series where we're following the trajectory of a veterinary degree from the preclinical disciplines like anatomy and physiology right up to advanced surgery and work with animal patients. So we're showing through case studies from across the world, across countries and cultures, and exploring the many different types of alternatives and specific products, how you can use humane innovations only in order to meet teaching objectives and exceed standard teaching objectives through the trajectory of a veterinary degree. And we are launching the first episode to be produced, which is called Surgery in the Sindava Canine. And this is an episode, a standalone episode, which focuses on advanced surgery using one specific advanced canine surgical mannequin, clinical skills and surgical mannequin. And that's something that we've been showing at multiple events around the world for the last year or so, and we're now launching it publicly too. So this really, I think, shows an exploration of surgery and more generally how you meet such a wide range of needs in knowledge and skills acquisition in what is often quite a short period of time, a veterinary degree. How can you get to the stage of being confident and competent upon graduation to go into the professions? In human medicine, of course, you have the many levels of your continuing education and refinement as you specialize. But in veterinary education, you have to be pretty much ready to work on animal patients upon graduation. So there's a big challenge there. And the episode explores how you can get to that stage more effectively by using these humane tools. these humane, innovative methods like the Sindava canine, for example. So it's an exploration using one tool that has many, many functionalities to see how you can gain knowledge, gain skills more effectively using such an advanced tool. And we explore that by interviews with teachers at Cornell University in the US, University of Florida at the US, and then also the producers of the mannequin itself, Sindava, the company. And we explore through interviews and then demonstrations of the tool, and then footage of one of the student labs itself, or 3 labs in one, looking at different procedures that the students, in this case at Cornell University, are actually practicing. So it's a film that explores through those 3 angles of interview, demos, and labs, how the nature of skills acquisition goes and how it can be enhanced using a really good non-animal tool. So we're very happy that that's been getting some good feedback. And while that specific tool, the Sindava canine, is expensive, it is, of course, an investment, and the tool itself lasts decades. It has some replaceable parts, of course, but it's very much an investment in the quality of education and ensuring that you can graduate being better trained. So it's a worthwhile investment. But I think it's also worth remembering that alternatives can be completely free. A body donation program is virtually free. Some software is free, some of it's very, very cheap. Self-experimentation works with existing students is pretty much free as well. So there are there's a very wide range of costs in terms of what these alternatives are, but ultimately you're going to be saving money and you're going to be reaping the rewards of your investment if the tool, like a synthetic canine or a virtual reality model, costs more. So all in all, we're saying that certainly it's a better way to teach. It's a more cost-effective way to teach in almost all cases. And even if it is more expensive, you're going to get better results. So it's worth that extra investment.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and it sounds so much more ethical, or let's say it sounds ethical compared to using animals in a way that it harms them. Thank you. Thank you for explaining this all. Thank you, everybody, for listening and watching, and till the next time.